James is going to have a bird feeding book review of I'm Your Man, The Life of Leonard Cohen by Sylvie Simmons?
Simmons, yeah.
Simmons?
Yeah, I must have blocked the answer. So this was published in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by a rock critic. I don't mean to be too critical of rock critics, but I don't think as highly of them as I used to, like around 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So she's an award-winning writer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all sorts of awards. And one of the foremost music journalists working today. So again, this is 10 years ago. So she was born in London. She moved to Los Angeles in the late 70s and started writing about rock music for magazines such as Sound, Cream, Kerrang, and Q. She is the author of acclaimed fiction and non-fiction books, including the biography of Serge Gainsbourg.
Oh, okay. So she likes doing music stuff.
A Fistful of Gitanes, and the short story collection Too Weird for Ziggy. That might even be Ziggy Stardust. She's lived at various times in the UK, US, and France, and she currently lives in San Francisco, California, where she writes for Mojo magazine and plays ukulele. Wow, that's a friendly dog. Oh, there goes Mac the
pug.
The pug. That's right, Mac the dog. Not Mac the knife, thank heavens. Very friendly dog. So yeah, she's quite well preserved. She's, of course, this would have been out 10 years ago, presumably the picture was taken. I figure, based on some of the data in the book, that she was born the same year that I was. So she would have, in this picture would have been, if it were current then, she would have been about 57 years old, which is pretty impressive. A little bit better preserved than Leonard Cohen. This, of course, was not Leonard Cohen in 2011 or anything like that. Some pretty good pictures here, things that I haven't seen, like early sorts of pictures of Leonard. So the first chapter is called I Was Born in a Suit. So that's one of his lines. So there's Leonard Cohen when he was a little baby, uncharacteristically smiling. Cute little guy, pudgy cheeks and stuff like that. But you can see he was born into privilege. So his family lived in Westmount. That's the English enclave in Montreal. I guess it still is. It's not nearly as populated. But the poor Jewish folk, maybe more for the security than anything, not the poor ones. The rich ones lived in Westmount along with the English folks and stuff like that. You see he has a little Band-Aid on his knee there.
It's pretty cute.
Yeah, it's pretty cute. But you can see he's was well born and stuff like that. So later on, one of the lines, it's a favorite at concerts, is, "My name is Leonard, blah, 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 blah. I'm a lazy bastard living in a suit." So and kind of like a Leonard Norman Cohen. There's a high school picture, maybe when he's in grade 12. So there's lots of talk about how the Jews didn't do well, and in Canadian society and stuff like that. So this would be about 1951, even before I was born, and I'm getting to be an old guy. So what does it say? Activities. He was a cheerleader, of all things. Even back in 51, I guess they had guy cheerleaders. So he shares that with George Bush Jr. YMHA, I don't know what that is, the Current Events Club, so he's interested in political science. Vox Ducum, which would be a voice of leadership or something like that, I presume. And that was their newspaper, student newspaper. He was involved with the art club and apparently did a lot of sketches. I haven't, even in later life, but I never saw him. I don't know if I've ever seen any, maybe the occasional album cover or something like that. He belonged to the Menorah Club, so that would presumably be some sort of Jewish club or stuff like that. But here at the top of it, Students' Council, president of Westmount High. So, that's 1951 or something. But no. Yeah, 51. He was born in 1934. So I think he graduated in 51. So Jews, I don't think were that poorly done by when it came to the English folk. The English folk would have been anti-Semitic. They probably got the richer ones, but they. His family were rich businessmen. His dad was a businessman, and two of his brothers were businessmen, and I think he was employed by at least one of his brothers after his dad died. His dad died, and Leonard Cohen's dad died when he was 9 years old. So he was kind of hard done by there. So there he is hanging with a woman called Mary Ann. So you might have even heard of that song that goes, "So long, Mary Ann, da-da-da-da-da-da." And there's another picture of Mary Ann, very Nordic. I think she was Norwegian or Danish or Swedish or something like that. There's Irving Layton, famous or infamous Canadian poet, slightly older contemporary of Leonard Cohen. He lived a long life, lived almost to be 90 years old. I think he was more my dad's age, maybe even a little bit older than my dad. It was my dad just died last year, last summer. Here's Leonard Cohen. He made a little trip down to Cuba right after the was it during the revolution? After? No, he was there when the Bay of Pigs happened. And he was so influential, like his mom got very concerned, phoned down the Canadian Embassy. The Canadian Embassy got hold of him, right, and sent him back home. So, when you're rich, you kind of got some privileges. So here's some of the influential and not so influential folk that he's hung out with. Here was his longtime guru. This guy, at the time of printing, this guru, not guru really, but he's a
Zen master.
Yeah, exactly right. His Zen master. He was 105 at the time this book was.
Wow.
But you could say, well, the Zen life's good for living, but like the Zen master had Leonard Cohen driving him around, down to Los Angeles. I used to wonder when I was a kid, they'd say Leonard Cohen would go down, and I think he spent 5 years at this guy's little enclave or something like that. And I knew it was in California, but I had no clue. Like it's just a few miles away from the urban sprawl of Los Angeles. It's called Mount Baldy. Actually, before I found out it was in California, I figured it was someplace in Oregon, But yeah, so this guy lived a life of privilege, and he's always Roshi is his name, or was his name. He might still be alive, Lord only knows. But looks a bit like Yoda there. But
he would look more like Yoda now if he was still alive.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Maybe even as green. But and here's a guy, he's hanging out with Willie York. So Leonard Cohen for a while would record in Nashville, and he had a little kind of like a place he lived down there while he was working. It was a spread that was owned by the guy who co-wrote I think All You Have to Dream or something like that. A couple of things. Or Love Hurts. Boudleau was last name, something like that. So this is one of Leonard's neighbors down there. And a guy who, he looks pretty innocuous, but he actually shot a sheriff. Or some sort of lawman down in Tennessee. And, he didn't get put away, much less put to death. And stuff like that. It's kind of weird. I don't know what the circumstances were. So this is Suzanne, but not the Suzanne that the song was written about. His long time. Well, I guess the woman that bore his two children, Leonard Cohen. She always seemed a little bit grumpy, I've got to say. My favorite is, what is it called? Death of a Ladies' Man, the cover there. She's with, I thought it was a rival, but it was a girlfriend of hers, not Leonard Cohen's. But he's just looking on this cover. He's looking absolutely sparkling, and she looks really grumpy. I wouldn't be surprised if he were, getting a little too close to her girlfriend. for comfort. There's Jennifer Warnes, a wonderful backup singer. Let me see. There's Adam Cohen, Leonard Cohen's son. He's in a very bad accident. I think he was in a coma for 4 months, they were saying. He's lucky to survive. He's smashed up a vertebrae or two, hence the funny little thing around his head. Oh, have you ever heard of Rebecca de Mornay or Mornay? She's supposed to have been a big movie star back in the day. And of course, he seemed to have a little preference, despite Suzanne, for blondes and stuff like that. So she and Leonard Cohen had a thing. Until I think he started straying a little bit, maybe a whole lot. There's his cabin on Mount Baldy. He had special privileges. You know, they're saying in here he didn't have any. He was treated like the rest. No. Had a cabin up there. The rest of the folks had to hang out. He had his own washroom. The others, you had to use a communal washroom, so on and so forth. But it's kind of, this reminds me of getting up towards Avion Ridge, coming on the west side, right? With it's supposed to be really rocky there, and so on and so forth. This is Leonard as he's getting a little bit on in the years. Here's another a backup singer that he had. Well, I guess he didn't always go for blondes. She's from Hawaii or something like that. Here he is singing maybe Hallelujah, showing off a few of his snazzy moves. He might have been snapping his fingers. No, he's holding the cord there to his microphone. And here he is singing. He had a bit of a snappy stage presence. It became evident to me that he actually had a facelift or two. You can see that jawline. He had a facelift. He lived to be about 80. He died within the last 10 years or so. So I read this book. It's about 600 pages, including the pictures. There are about 16 pictures in there. 600 pages in one day, 24 hours. And I was just wanting to see how much stuff I could stash away, or how much I do stash away. I don't stash away. I figured I stash away the equivalent of 2 books a day. I do a lot of memorization and stuff like that. So, but I figure this isn't small format. It's not like a paperback. It's quite large printing, but I stash away maybe the equivalent of 600 pages of this format size a day. Now, is this book, it's pretty good for a rock critic kind of thing. In other words, it deals more with his life, not his lyrics and stuff like that. Should they be dealing with the lyrics? Of course. Now, Leonard Cohen, he died before they could give him the Nobel Prize for Literature. He deserved the Nobel Prize for Literature way more than Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan might have deserved it too. This guy is one of the few guys in modern times who's had the courage to actually write poetry. You got, since Ezra Pound, you had also Hilda Doolittle, H.D., T.E. Hume, even T.S. Eliot was scared away from it. He wrote all his good stuff before 1922. The Wasteland, his big monumental work, was messed up by Ezra Pound. It's just disgusting. And you see what Ezra Pound, who supposedly edited the original documents for the Wasteland. The Wasteland was kind of a wasteland, a mess of various things that in an unfinished state that Eliot had, and Pound messed them all up. And so he was scared away from writing poetry, and real poetry, not like he increasingly tended towards what would be more or less free verse in his plays and stuff like that. I'm talking about T.S. Eliot. And especially Canadian poets, they were wanted to be so American, so they outdid the Americans. It's almost every Canadian poet, after A.M. Klein and A.J.M. Smith, something like that. They were just writing in free verse. They weren't really poets. Irving Layton, who was a bit of a mentor for Leonard Cohen was a bit of an exception, although his practice of verse was pretty loose and loosey-goosey and stuff like that. He really didn't have much of a sense of rhythm or whatever. He'd throw in some rhymes, but that's not really what poetry is about. It's good to throw in rhymes or some sort of sound patterning, but the real thing about poetry is rhythm. And if you can't control rhythm, it's going to vary from one language to another. Let's just call it prosody. You don't write poetry. You're writing prose. And you'll have all sorts of idiots strutting around say, I write poetry. The guy who was supposed to be teaching me poetry, I paid him money via the university to do this back in the 70s. I'm going to name his name, Marty Ort. You hearing me? In afterlife, Marty, I know which direction I should be looking when I'm addressing you. But he was the kind of guy who'd say, you don't write poetry. And of course the implied thing is, I write poetry. And he knew nothing about it. He'd be tripping around in his little fake cowboy boots. I should have looked closer. They're probably plastic or something like that. What an idiot. He had a little spread out east of here towards Coaldale. He might have been a gentleman farmer or something like that. It would be a little acreage, like I'm a little country boy. What a fake. At any rate, Leonard Cohen is one of the few guys who bucked that stupid trend it's a response to the Romantics, and the Romantics were a response, an attempt to get away from what they thought of as artificial diction of the 18th century. So in the 19th century, they're getting away from what they saw as artificial diction, getting down to the diction of the people. But the big trouble is they weren't writing English. They were even worse, I think, than the 18th century classicists for inversion. They weren't writing English. So along come the free versers, and they're going, hey, these guys aren't writing English poetry. So they proceeded to write English prose. And then they were faking as though it was English poetry. No, it was English prose. And can you turn off the camera?
Why?
Just because. Is your name Barbara Dick?